I want to I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this year's Fifth Avenue Synagogue Yom HaShoah commemoration. Zachor means to remember. In our tradition, we are often commanded to remember. We remember the Shabbos each and every week at the Kiddush. We remember the Pesach story on Passover and in the third paragraph of the Shema daily. And we are not only commanded to remember the favorable times, we are also commanded to remember the inauspicious ones as well. We remember the wicked ways of Amalek and that there is evil in this world. We remember the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, repeatedly throughout the year. A strength of our nation has always been that we tend not to forget. We hold on to things tightly. If we forget Israel, if we forget the Holy Land, we took an oath that let our right hand be forgotten as well. And this is why we gather here together today, to remember and to honor the memory of our brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, sons and daughters who perished during the Shoah. The number 6 million will forever live in infamy. It's a number so enormous that honestly, it is simply too large to comprehend. Who could relate to such a colossal number as 6 million? Nowadays, even when people visit the death camps, which is quite common today, I've heard many times that even while standing in the center of Auschwitz, you still cannot grasp the enormity of the tragic events that took place. It's simply unimaginable. Therefore, the best way, and really the only way, to relate to this tragedy is through the story of the individual. To hear individual stories, experiences, and perspectives, and this is what we plan to do here today. We're going to hear stories of individual experiences. First, Mr. Joseph Guttmann, a survivor and long-time member of the Fifth Avenue Synagogue, followed by Mr. Joshua Fishman, whose parents, Paula Fishman, may she live and be well, and who was a survivor, one of the individuals saved by Oscar Schindler, and Mr. David Fishman, a member of ours for many years of blessed memory. We're both, he's a survivor as well. We're going to hear a little bit, some of the stories from his son, Joshua.
Thank you, Rabbi. Joseph, come. So first of all, it's a great honor today to have Jack, Joseph, and Shoal. Jack, last year we did our Yom HaShoah on Zoom, and it's great to see you in person. And we want to see you all the time in Shoal. You look great, and welcome, Jack. Joseph, you could please come. So we're going to start today's program. As Rabbi Babbage said, that Joseph Guttmann is was a child during the Holocaust. Is that correct?
Yes, I was 4 years old.
4 years old. So, so tell us a little bit, Joseph. Thank you for joining us today, and thanks for all you do for Fifth Avenue. But tell us a little bit. You're 4 years old. I don't know how good your memory is when you were 4, but tell us what you remember from that age.
Thanks God, I don't remember too much. My memory starts in Budapest in the ghetto. We were the last transport to Auschwitz.
Wow.
Actually, I was in the transport together with our good friend and old members of the park of the Fifth Avenue Synagogue, Mickey Weinberger.
Sure.
We were on the same train. The train was destined to Auschwitz. Fortunately enough, when the train left Budapest and got to the Polish border, which is basically like a fork, to the left, to the right, it was Poland, and to the left was Austria. The railroad was bombarded by the Russian army, and the train couldn't go to Auschwitz. As everybody knows that if all the trains which arrived to Auschwitz, the first people who were sent to the gas chambers would be the children. So I wouldn't be here if the train would go to Auschwitz. So
always the children were the first.
always the children were the first. So anyway, the train went to Austria. I was in the train together with my mother, my grandmother, my brother, and my two sisters. I have a little, as I said, I have very selected memories, but I still have it in my ears when the cattle car doors closed. Sometimes I dream about it, I hear it. Anyway, we didn't have such a bad time in Austria. We were there in a camp, which was basically a labor camp. They were producing their ammunition and food. And it was a camp from the SS. The head of the camp behaved towards the Jews, I would say, in a very good way. Matter of fact, after the war, he was trialed, and people from our city in Hungary came to testify in his behalf. So we were again liberated by the.
Why do you think that is? Just because it was the end, or just
No,
got
I don't
lucky?
think so. I think that was his demeanor.
Interesting.
I mean, he behaved like we were also human beings. I mean, I don't remember that in particular, but I know it from my mother, my grandmother. Again, we were liberated. We were liberated by the Russian army in July 1945. We were transported back to Hungary in February 1946. I was again lucky, and I have been put together in a transport to Switzerland, which was called the Children Transport. It was a whole train from Budapest to Switzerland to Davos. And we were in Davos in a children's sanatorium. Most of the children had all kinds of sicknesses. Thanks God, I was pretty good, okay. And we were in this sanatorium until March 1948. And in March 1948, we have been with a group of Aliyat Noar. This was the group of Hadassah Aliyat Noar. We have been transported to Israel.
So you went 1948 to Israel
To
first?
Israel before the establishment of the state of Israel.
So how long did you stay in Israel from 19?
I was in Israel until the end of '62. Luckily, I served in the Israeli armed forces for 5.5 years.
Wow.
I was a commanding officer in the liberation of Yerushalayim. I was the right hand of Motagur. And, we came to the United States. In the end of my services, I was quite heavily wounded. My mother lived in Belgium. My father died. Was killed in the war.
So your father did not?
No, he didn't survive. My mother got remarried in Belgium, as I was quite heavily wounded in in certain skirmishes, whatever it is. I still had to, actually, I signed up for another 5 years, but my mother came from Belgium and was sitting next to me in the hospital in Haifa for a month, saying day and night till him.
Wow.
But I had to resign from the army, whatever it is. I came to Belgium end of 62, and I came to the United States. I got married. Actually, I got married in Jerusalem. We came to Belgium. I became to the United States in 1972 with 2 children.
In New York or LA? Where'd you go first?
Actually, we were first in New York, and we lived for 28 years in LA. Today we have 10 grandchildren.
Wow.
We have 2 great grandchildren, and we are looking forward to more and more.
Amen.
Ken Yerbo.
Yep.
This is our answer to Hitler. We are here. Lo namut v'nichyeh.
And you have one grandson, if I recall, is on the YU basketball team. We're going to be interviewing right?
Yeah. I mean, he's finishing. I mean, this is last year. He's the star of Yeshiva University. Gabriel Leifer.
Very nice. So tell us about, first of all, thanks for sharing all that. Tell us what year you ended up at Fifth Avenue Synagogue and how that happened.
I actually ended up in 1998. We ended up in New York because 2 of our oldest daughter came to University to New York. They were in Columbia, Barnard, and we decided. And most of my business is overseas, and the family of my wife, they live in Belgium, in Antwerp. And she was the oldest daughter, and it was very difficult for her to commute to Brussels because there was no direct flights. So we decided to come to New York, and I had before already for several years. I had an office on 80th and Madison, and we found an apartment here on Park Avenue. It was the closest shul was Fifth Avenue. So by proxy, we became members. But I have to admit, because I had a little bit red flag from Park East, I am also a member of Park East. And they say, why are you going to the program of the Holocaust to Fifth Avenue? We want also to make a program.
Okay, good. We
So
inspire others.
I said, go and ask Jacob Gold.
So I didn't know the army part. How many years did you serve in the army total?
I actually, 5.5 years. It was a very interesting thing because in Israel, I was in a kibbutz, and I skipped from the 6th grade to the 8th grade. And in the kibbutz, everything was assigned through school years. So when I finished high school, I was 16 and a half. And all the other kids in my grade, they were 17 and a half and 18. So I went together to enlist to the army. So this is different, the whole story. I came there, I was the youngest child, I was 16 and a half, and I was in the base, which is today the Shiva Hospital. That was the main base for the recruiters. And the head of this recruiting place looked at me, said to me, how old are you? I said 18. He looked at me, said like this, he said, my eyes. So anyway, to make the story short, he said, you need a letter from your parents. I said, I don't have parents. So he said, but you have a mother or father? I said, I have a mother. She lives in Belgium. So that was a Friday, and he said, there is a formula. You have to send it to her. And I said, okay, 2 signatures to sign it. So it was a Friday, we went back to Shabbat to the kibbutz, and on Sunday we had to enlist again. So I came with the letter signed. He said to me, I don't know, I never heard about it that the Israeli post worked so fast. So we had a whole discussion, and Ariel Sharon passed by, and he says, what is this whole discussion? So he was telling, you know, this guy is telling me stories, and say, Ariel Sharon looked at me. He said to them, I need guys like that. And I ended up with him.
So you said you went to Israel before Israel was formed,
Yes,
correct?
yes.
So, but you were there during that period of time. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Not much to talk about it.
It must have been exciting.
About my excitement. Okay, I was trying to write a little bit my memory, as because of my high ranking, I had everything to submit to a censor in Israel. So I sent it, I submitted. So I got back of my pages, 90% was black. So I cannot talk much about it, unfortunately. But, you know, my children are bothering me all the time. Abba, you have to write, you have to write. I said, it's not important, it's past, it's my other life.
So that's another discussion. But so your children and grandchildren would like you to document,
Yeah.
and you're so far not interested.
Well, you know, I'm interested, but the other higher ranking people are definitely not interested. You have to understand that at that time, when I was in the army, it was a jungle. I mean, in my 5.5 years, I perhaps together, I wore, beside official ceremonies, I wore my uniform perhaps 5 times. We were without uniform, and we did perhaps things which we wouldn't be able to do it today, because today Israel is looking very, very much what the world says. And I remember I attended a meeting with, it was there Moshe Dayan with Ben Gurion, and Moshe Dayan was a little bit more liberal, and he says, what will the UN says? But the UN was called in Ivrit So Ben Gurion says, shmum. He says, we don't care, we care what we can do here. So that's basically, in short. I was in between the kibbutz, I was for a year and a half in the Ponevezh Yeshiva.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
That's
My
exciting.
mother, we are descendant of the Maharal, and
Wow.
my mother was dreaming about the new Maharal, but she came to visit me, was at the time Rav Kahneman, and she said, I don't know what to do with this son. He wants to leave the yeshiva. He said, he's not made for a yeshiva, let him go to the army.
So what year were you in Panovich? How old were you?
I was in elementary school, actually. There was a group there was called Beta Vot, which were for children in elementary school. That was in 1956, 55.
Exciting. So this is our first hybrid Zoom. So today is Baruch Hashem well attended. So we can really open the floor to some questions here. Linda Schoenfeld?
Yes, I wanted to know when after the
I'll
war-
repeat the question over for Zoom, but go ahead.
When after the war, when you were in the children's kinder transport that went to Switzerland?
To Davos, to
To
Switzerland,
Davos,
yeah.
And did you have your sisters and brother with you? at that time?
Nobody. That was a funny experience, because we arrived to Davos, we got done from the train, and there were some bizarre people talking to us a language that nobody understood the word. So actually, when I reunited in Israel with my mother in 51, luckily my mother was from Czechoslovakia, from Sudetenland, and they spoke at home German. In Sudetenland, that's what they spoke. And the only language which I knew was German. it's more, it was German, or what they call it at that time, Schweizerdeutsch, you know. So that was a short-lived experience, but it was, I remember it very clearly. We didn't understand the word, and Schweizerdeutsch is a very difficult language. But when we went to kindergarten, and so there they spoke to it normal German.
So when did you reunite with your brother?
In 51,
Oh, they came.
they were in Hungary, and they left in 51. They left to Austria, to Vienna, and from there they made Aliyah.
Anyone else have any questions for Joseph? Cantor?
I know the whole story.
Okay. Joseph, anything else you want to, we have very few members that are still around from the Holocaust. So, it's important to have you here today, and we appreciate all your time. Is there anything else that you want to talk about or share with
Yeah,
us?
I hope to be here for the next 10 years at least.
10? Why only 10?
Well, when I go to my physical therapy, and actually my cardiologist is a Jewish guy who speaks Yiddish. So when I'm coming home, my wife says, "So what did he say?" So I said to her, "Hat mir gegeben a 50." So if you say so, another 50.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Joseph.
Take care.
Really appreciate it. So today
Thank you
we're
very much.
very privileged to have Paula Fishman and Josh Fishman here. Let's bring another chair. Okay. One second. In the middle. I know. Here, come. Okay, okay. Thank you so much, Paula, for coming today. I know it's not easy to be here,
No,
but
never easy.
we really, really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you, Josh, for everything.
My
So,
privilege.
Josh, I maybe let you lead the discussion, but I don't know what your mother feels comfortable discussing, and I don't want to.
We'll find out. We'll find out.
Okay, so Josh, why don't you
Okay.
lead? I'd like you to
So-
talk a little bit about your father who's not here,
I will.
and
I will.
I just want to say, when I joined the shul, David Fishman, the Fishmans have a Torah in the synagogue, which will be in our new sanctuary. And your late husband would always speak on the yard sites, I believe, of his father and his mother. And he
True.
spoke so eloquently and so passionately. And unfortunately, we have very few members that do that. Our Libman Oliver Shalmis do that, but something that hopefully other members will do. And it was a really nice tradition. And he took the shul very seriously. He was in shul, if I recall, every Shabbos. And he always had a positive word to say, and they always contributed and helped the shul. And we miss your husband very much.
So do I.
And I do.
But Josh, I'll let you go.
Okay, so first of all, let me thank Jacob and Rabbi Babbage, and of course, Chazan Malavani, recognize the Achsanya of the shul for allowing me the privilege to be here with my mother, Tibadel Chayim Tovim, Baruchim. She should
Translate.
live and be well in good health for many years to come.
Amen.
And I will say that it took I have a twin brother, Alan, and it took us many, many years to convince my mother to allow us to interview her. about her life, which just happened about 6 months ago. The video is still being edited, and it was not for public consumption, it was for family consumption. And so I had an opportunity actually to recount this information to my grandson's class, because they were reading a book about the Holocaust, and it paralleled my mother's life. So I'll give you a little background about my mother, and she's sitting here to correct me whenever the need arises. So my mother was born in August 3rd, 1925 in Krakow. She was born at home, not in a hospital. I will say that we have a history in both the Fishman side and the Grossbart Hirschfeld side, which is my mother's maiden name, that goes back hundreds of years in Krakow. On my mother's side, it goes back to the chief rabbis of Krakow back in the 1600s. And we at least can trace my father's lineage back to the forests of Yashin in Poland, back to the early 1800s. That's as far as the stories go that we know. So we have, thank God, 100% Eastern European Jewish DNA. Not 99%, which is something I'm very proud of because it tells me where I come from. My mother was the family of herself, her brother, who was 4 years older than she was, and her parents. They lived an authentic Torah life in Krakow, not Hasidic, but Orthodox. My uncle went to yeshiva, Cheder, it turns out, with my father, and my mother went to school with my father's sister, although they did not know that they had my father in common. So they didn't meet until 1949 in the United States. As you all know, in August of 1939, the Germans marched into Poland, and I think it was September 6th that they marched into Krakow. They took over the Wawel Castle, which was the castle where the kings of Poland used to reside and are buried, as their headquarters. 5 days later, on September 11th, and this is a unique story, there was reputed to be gunfire fired at the governor of the German occupation in Krakow, and they decided to round up all the men in the vicinity of that castle, which included my grandfather, my mother's father, and brother. My grandfather had a grocery store, quasi-grocery store, and other, I guess you'd call it like a CVS today in terms of what they did, not just groceries, but other things. And it was really down right below the Wawel Castle on Gertruda Street, not Gertruda Street.
Right.
Right. 24, if I remember. Yes.
Remember.
And they were taken to the prison, and my uncle was working for my grandfather at the time in the store. My mother was not there. She was out running errands, delivering things for my grandfather, for her father. And they took them to the prison in Krakow.
Also Gentiles.
Gentiles also, not just Jews. That was the last time my mother saw her brother. She was 14. He was not quite 18. That was the last time he saw her. And she only saw her father one more time. And that was when her mother gave her food to take to the prison in Krakow. And she saw him from a window. And that was the last time she saw her father. They were taken to Buchenwald, and we have documentation which shows how they were brought in, what they took with them, what their name, what their work was, whether they were quarry workers. It was just made up, but the Red Cross kept these records, and the Germans were very proud to keep these records. So we have them. They brought a valise and a satchel and 2 socks and a pair of pants. It was very detailed. In November of 1939, they get a telegram that her brother died. 2 o'clock in the morning from a heart attack. 17-year-old boy dies of a heart attack in the middle of the night, and they got a telegram. it was May of 1940, they get another telegram that her father died from a cold in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. With that notification came a check for his wages in Reichsmarks and an urn with his ashes. And that was,
But that was before Buchenwald was really a concentration camp in the 40s. This was for prisoners, German prisoners, murderers.
so they took them to Buchenwald. My parents, my mother and her mother were left alone now. Her mother, a broken woman, without a son, without a husband, and they lived in a street right near the Ramosh synagogue, literally around the corner from the synagogue. And they were not allowed to stay there anymore because it was for families. So they ended up having to move into a room with a cousin, an aunt cousin. And then they also had to move somewhere else. You heard about, about the liquidation. My mother didn't talk to me about her life when I was growing up. When I was about 15 or 16, she handed me Thomas Keneally's book, Schindler's List. Long before it was a spark in Steven Spielberg's eye, he didn't know anything about it. Said, you want to know about my life? Here, read, this is my story. With the exception that she was not the Krakow ghetto at the time of the first liquidation, because she was working at the airport in Krakow, being taken back and forth from the airport. Her mother, who was all of 42, was too old to do that work. She was sweeping the streets in Krakow. You know the story of Spielberg, of Schindler's List? She went to Plaszow concentration camp. She had cousins. In 1942, her mother was taken to be sent to East, to be relocated. And she had a conversation with my mother. This is a few things. I don't need it right now, a sweater. When I get to where I'm going, it'll turn cold. You'll send them to me. Lihitraot, basically. That was the last time she saw her mother. So at the age of 17 in 1942, she was an orphan. No brother, no parents, a couple of cousins who were already working in Schindler's factory. She was not yet working in Schindler's factory. And eventually she was able to get into the line with Schindler. Interesting story that she told us. There were two lines. Her cousins were over with Schindler and she was on the other line, and she ran over, and she's, as you can see, she's short. She was very pretty and cute. And she ran across to Schindler, who was a big man, and said, I'm alone. I only have this family. When you call, please include me. So he said he would. So she went back. She left her peckle on that line. She went back, and then she ran across anyway. And then when she came up to Schindler, Schindler said to her,
Du hast doch geschwindelt. You cheated anyway.
so she ended
Which
up
I
in
did.
she ended up in October 1944 with Schindler. And you all know the story about how when Schindler decided that he was moving his factory to Czechoslovakia, to Brinlitz, which is his native country. And the women were diverted to Auschwitz. The men went directly to where they went through how? Grossrost. And the women were taken, about 300 women were taken, and they were separated in Auschwitz. Their hair was cut, not shaved. They weren't given tattoo numbers. All my mother could tell me was that they didn't do anything except being counted day and night. Being counted day and night. You've seen, if you've been to any of the museums, you've seen the shoes, you've seen the bowls, the wooden bowls that they were given to eat from. It served a dual purpose. I don't have to elaborate. And eventually they were there for about, 6 weeks? Not like the movie makes it sound like they were there for 3 days and Schindler came and got them out. His secretary came, it took a little trouble to get them, the women to get to Brinlitz, where the factory, as he said, if it produces one munition, it'll have been a failure. And the Russians ended up liberating my mother in 1945. Was it 1945, right?
May 9.
May 9th, 1945. The day before, they were digging their own graves. The truth was that Schindler was a war criminal in the eyes of the Czechoslovakians and the Russians. And that is why you saw them put them into their uniforms and give them a letter so that they would be saved. Schindler was a business failure, both before and after the war, to the point that I remember my parents going to Manhattan. We lived in Woodmere at the time. I'll retrace that. And to a benefit to help raise money for Schindler and his wife, because he was penniless.
Shoah Karsatov, you're saying? Is that?
Yes, well, they recognized that, of course, he saved their lives, and they wanted to do something back for him. After their liberation, they went to Prague, right? Prague. They really couldn't go back to Poland, and anybody they could, but it was not the place to go.
We didn't go because we knew nobody survived from the family.
Right.
Eventually, they were able to get through the joint.
No, through Germany
through
France.
Germany to Paris. So she, with her two first cousins, went to Paris, where my mother stayed for 4 years, waiting for a visa to New York, to America, which was very difficult to get because you couldn't come in illegally.
You
There were
had to
quotas.
have also 2 sponsors at that time. So I had one sponsor, was a very distant cousin, and one sponsor was Aguda, believe it or not, because Rabbi Lewin, the father of this present
Lawyer.
lawyer, came to Paris to help the displaced people. And since he was a very distant family, he helped me getting an affidavit.
So how did you reach him, or how did that happen? How did,
He came,
Son,
they were
He
displaced.
came to Paris. I don't know how I met him.
okay.
I know that he went with me to the Polish consulate to straighten out my name.
Wow. I'm sure he helped other people also.
Of
Okay.
course,
It's a Kiddush to me.
of course.
I'm learning something new right now. Let me just put my father into this
Please.
picture. My father was also born in Krakow, and his father, my grandfather, sent him to England at the age, he was not quite 17. My grandfather had been on a vacation visit to England and left money with a grocer in Manchester. I think it was Manchester, not in London, in Manchester. And when my father went, he was the oldest of 5 children. And he was responsible for that money. It was in today's,
He was sent to school.
he was sent to school there, but he ended up going to textile school there.
Gateshead,
Gateshead, I don't think he ended up at Gateshead, but his cousin Eli ended up at Gateshead.
okay.
But he was responsible for what would have been a substantial amount of money. He was a very serious young man, very responsible, much more responsible than 16-year-olds are today. And this was in 1937. Of course, the war broke out, and in 1940, his father, nobody ever expected any occupation office to force to harm women and children. So my grandfather fled in 1940 through Trieste to Lisbon to Tangiers. And my father's brother went with his uncle to Russia, leaving my grandmother and my father's three sisters in Krakow, where they perished. After the war, we have a letter of my grandfather when he was in New York sending requests to the Polish newspaper looking for information about the family, which we got one letter back which told something, a story about two girls who jumped off a train, and the guy went to look for them, and by the time he came back, they were dead. There's some stories to that effect. My father ended up in the British Army as a Brit, not as a Pole, and he ended up in Palestine, and ultimately back to England afterwards. There are a lot of stories of his stay in Palestine, including a letter that he wrote to the Secretary of Armed Services in 1945 when he was there after Pesach. So he was not quite 23. He was just 23. And it was very prescient about the place that Israel and the new Palestine, as he called it, would serve for the Jewish people, and how the only place for survival of the Jewish people is this new Palestine. For me, the seriousness of the prescient approach to what Israel was going to be like was amazing, and he was always a very, very strong supporter of the state of Israel. He opened up a shirt factory in Manchester with a partner. My grandfather ended up coming to New York in 1946, 47, because his brother, who had worked for Phillips Brothers in Berlin, was already here and was able to get him in. Started selling, but then my grandfather was not well. My father sold his interest, came here. Kibud Av, more important than anything else for my father. He revered his father. So here we have my mother in Paris in 1945 to 1949, my father in New York in 1947, 48. He ended up coming into my grandfather's business, became from A. Fishman to A. Fishman and Son, which it still is today, which I'm in the business now, diamond business. And he had my mother was able to finally come to New York in 1949. My grandfather had another colleague also from Krakow in the same business who knew of my father. Said, do you have a girl that could be for my father? So it turns out that this family, Feigenbaum, changed the name to Fagin, their daughter was their daughter-in-law was my mother's childhood friend from Krakow, still to this day, thank God. And she said, yes, I know somebody who's just off the boat. So in December of 1949, they met. In March of 1950, they married. In June of 1951, my brother and I were born. And fast forward now, we lived in Woodmere, and my father decided eventually that they wanted.
We lived in Manhattan.
We lived in Manhattan.
We went to yeshiva, Soloveitchik yeshiva.
I didn't know that.
Kindergarten.
Which Soloveitchik? The Rav?
I guess
Yeah,
so.
okay. Washington Heights. Different Soloveitchik. Whatever it was, I don't remember it.
No.
Then we moved to Woodmere, and so at some point my parents decided in 1974, 75, maybe they were able to get an apartment in Manhattan in addition to their house in
No,
Hewlett.
you went to school.
I'm not, the story isn't about me. The story's
Well,
about you.
went to yeshiva.
I went to yeshiva, I went to
For
High Life
12
for 12
years.
years. I played basketball, went to college. My brother went to college, but then I got married, and then they decided they were able to get an apartment on 74th Street between 3rd and 2nd Avenue. And my father, who had brought up in an Orthodox community and had gone to Sons of Israel in Woodmere, which was call it a conservadox synagogue, very unusual compromised synagogue with a men's and a women's and a united and a joint sections. And there was Orthodox services on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, which we attended. And so he wanted to go to an Orthodox synagogue when he moved into the city, and he was enamored with Chazonos. He wanted to go where there was a great chazan. So where could he find? He found Chazan Malavani. My mother's
74, what year was this?
yeah, well, it was probably in 74, 75. How long did you have the apartment on 74th Street? Because we're talking
It was a pied à terre.
maybe
really.
80, maybe 1980, something like that.
Do you remember, Cantor,
Six,
the date?
I
you
don't
met them?
remember.
Do you remember the date? The date you met the Fishmans?
No,
Yeah, because it's been
70s.
25 years. My father donated, my parents donated the Sefer Torah 25 years ago.
Okay.
So that would be 1997,
Okay,
Right.
no, we
and
are
my
here
father-
about 20 years.
more than that.
more than that.
More than
that.
that, because my father, it was
I'm here
for his
too.
75th birthday. So that was
yeah,
1990, that was 1996 already. So had to be the late 80s, 90s. They ended up getting the apartment here now in 2000. 2000. And my father always kept his talis, he kept his tefillin here. And he enjoyed this davening. He enjoyed this shul immensely. He had tapes of Chazonis, which my mother, who inherited his SIM card on his iPhone when he was niftar, listens to, and he listened to that. And in fact, I remember we were in business together. We had his uncle, my great uncle, who was in Bnei Brak. And we were sitting on the porch of the terrace when I was already in the business in the late 80s. We were sitting on the terrace in Bnei Brak with his uncle Chaim, and he had a grandson, and his grandson had a beautiful voice, and he sang Rosa de Shabbos, and he just sang that, and my father was like in heaven. So this is what I think brought him primarily to Fifth Avenue Synagogue, where he
And he was
tried.
very close with Rabbi Roth.
He's
also.
very close with Rabbi Roth. Rabbi Roth is the one who gave him the privilege, which he didn't give to everybody, to deliver Divrei Torah in his stead on the yard sites in both August and then in October, November for his mother and father. I happen to have compiled whatever he was able to put on the computer, which he was very proficient at. I compiled, and on his putting up of his matzeva year after his niftar, I produced a volume for the family, which included all his divrei Torah that I could put together, as well as the eulogies that the children had. And I'm sure I skipped over some of the difficult times of my mother's life in the war.
Because
It
you
was
cannot
difficult.
really translate it. Your
But,
pain, you cannot put to words.
Sure.
But she has now had the opportunity to address her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren,
I'm-
5 grandchildren and 11 great-grandchildren, who are interested in knowing the story. And that's really brought her out of her shell, because she wasn't going to talk to me and my brother about it, but to the next generation and the succeeding generation.
Well,
She is.
also the reason why I wasn't talking to my children, I didn't want them to grow up with a certain complex. Oh, I have to do it because my mother suffered. Oh, I should be good because my mother suffered. So I wanted to eliminate this from my personality, and I was mostly talking to my cousin who survived with me. I also didn't think not my children, but other people didn't want to hear anything. They were busy with themselves. The survivors couldn't talk, and the people didn't want to listen.
It's changed. It's
It
changed.
changed.
There was no Holocaust.
Wiesel primarily also contributed to, but people didn't read that much.
When we were going to school in the 50s and 60s, there was no Yom HaShoah.
Not only that,
Wasn't.
there was no books.
There were no
I
books
read the night, but my children didn't read it
till later.
till later.
But now, as the generation, survivor generation is
Now I am
depleting.
being interviewed every week by my great grandchildren, the 10 of them. except-
11.
Yes, no, but one is not up to it.
Not yet, right?
Okay.
He's only 7.
Don't challenge my memory.
Josh, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
You were talking about Krakow, obviously. I've been there many, many times. Sunday. Do you have any idea which shul
Oh.
you
Talking to me,
Josh?
then I don't know.
Which shul
I-
in Krakow where the members attended, whatever?
I know for a fact that my grandfather used to attend a small shtibel. I don't know exactly where, but in addition, because my father described how he used to carry his shtreimel, small shtreimel, on Shabbos. He didn't wear it during the week, only on Shabbos, only in the shul. But there's another shul that exists now that Chabad runs.
Oh, now
The
it's
Chabad,
different.
the Chabad runs where he used to attend. It was next to the Cheder, because in 2014, I went with KJ a second time. I went with my mother and father the first time in 1994. Then I went 20 years later with KJ, and I davened Musaf on Shabbos that day. I was supposed to read the Torah, but the Chabad rabbi decided he was going to read the Torah. This was right before Tisha B'Av. It was Shabbos Nachamu, in fact, and it's right. It had the staircase up for the women from the outside. It was recessed a little bit back from the street. You know this. So he used to attend there. Yeah, he used to daven there.
So he did not daven at the Ramos shul.
He didn't really, although in 1990 we did. We took over the davening. I read Parshas Shlach. My father davened and my brother davened. We took over because he knew the Rosh Kehillah with the keys, the man with the keys. So we were able to get into the cemeteries and the shuls that were otherwise
Well, the
unavailable.
cemetery is next door to the shul.
Right. That the Ramosh, but the other.
Anyone else have questions for Paula or Josh? Walter, Brenda, give any? Jack? Rabbi Babish? Do you have any questions, or Rachel?
It's okay. You don't have to
Okay.
force it.
Josh, Paula, I want to thank you so much. I know it was hard for you to come here today,
Yes.
and we always love seeing you, and it
Thank
means a
you.
lot that you did this for the synagogue today.
Thank
And
you.
Josh, you're amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And you guys got to come back to your father's yard site. Keep the
I will.
tradition.
I'll try to do my best.
I'm going to invite the rabbi
Josh
up.
belongs to KJ.
I belong to two shuls.
That's confidential.
I belong to the young Israel of Scarsdale and to KJ.
He's a guest here.
But he's going to come for your husband's yard site, Meretz Hashem, and speak.
When is
Okay.
the Yom
It's the 13th of Elul.
Okay,
12, I think.
I have it down.
okay,
Check.
okay.
I'll find it.
Rabbi and Cantor, please come up. Thank you, everyone.
What?
He was I know when the yard site.
Who's right?
I'll look. I'll look.
Wait, no touch.
I can't help it.
What I can do myself, I won't help.
Paula and Josh and Joseph, Thank you so much for those.
Yes, I know who you are. I say, don't test my memory. That's one thing that it's good. Not my legs, but my memory. That's fantastic.
Thank you so much for those very moving words.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We have very fond memories of your husband and Father David. Truly an upstanding individual, real mensch.
I miss your father.
Close. Yes. And Joseph, thank you so much for your words as well. I didn't know all the stories about you. I didn't know you.
Many more stories.
Yes.
Trust me.
Come back next year.
And it's a great honor to have you, both of you, and it's a true treasure for our
One
community
day it's
to
a
have you
time.
together.
Okay.
Now, the pasuk in Mishlei says, "Ner Hashem nishmas Adam," a flame, a candle, represents the soul. It's the soul of Hashem. We're going to light 6 candles to commemorate the fallen 6 million. Paula, if you could kindly light the first candle. You just
I
press that.
have this, I don't know whether I,
Just push it. Just
no,
push it.
I can't do it. I have it home too.
Joseph. Just press hard.
Okay, okay.
Hillary, you want another candle? Just push it. Just press it. Yeah. Shimshon?
Right?
Welcome back to America. Yeah.
Morgan? Just press hard. Pastor Malavani will now recite the Kalmal.
Eile mali rachamim, shochein b'meromim, dayan almanos vavi esoemim, ametzei menucha nechoena, ale kanefei hashechina. במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מאירים ומזהירים לנשמות 6 מיליוני אחינו ואחיותינו אנשים, נשים וטוב שנהרגו ושנשחטו ושנחנקו ושנשרפו ושנקברו חיים Ale Kiddush Hashem Bidei HaTzorerim HaGermanim HaNazim VeYozreim Sheyalechu Leyolamam Balorachamim Yastireim Beseise Kenafav Leyolamim Veitzro Bitzro Achayim Es Nishmoseyem Began Eden Began Eden Tehei Menuchasam Lochein Baal Horachamim Yastirem Beseiser Kenafav Leyolamim Veitzro Bitzro Achayim Es Nishmosem Veyanuchu Beshalom Ale Mishkevosem Veyakumu Leketz hayamim lecha yesam v'noemar Amen.
We are very fortunate and privileged to live in an era that was very different than 1945 to what Paula, Jack, and Joseph experienced following the war. Today, we have a wondrous state of Israel, the center of Jewish life, a very vibrant country. We have a tremendous amount of Jewish education, an explosion. There are schools turning away people because they literally have no room in the classrooms, thank God. And it's a very different world. Soon, in a couple of weeks, there'll be the Israeli Day Parade, and it's always very heartwarming to see these schools with hundreds and hundreds of kids loyal to the Torah, to Israel, and to Jewish history. We always must remember to express our appreciation for God's kindness and how He lifted us up from the dust, from the ashes, from the dry bones. He returned us to Israel, as the prophecy and Yechezkel predicted will happen. We always must express our appreciation to God's divine grace. It's our custom always to conclude the Yom HaShoah program with the singing of the Hatikvah.
Kol od ba'eva penima nefesh Yehudi homiya ulfatei mizrach kadima ayin lezion Sophia Olo התקווה בת שנות 2000 להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים ירושלים, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים.
Thank you all for joining us. Everyone should have a Shavua Tov, a Chodesh Tov, and please God only have vacations for our community and Jewish world.